was there. So I just texted him and said, come to Zoom. So I think that's part of the, maybe where people are. Some
Zoom
people
on over.
They might be in that Meet thing instead of being in Zoom.
Okay, thank you for that. Here comes Tom. Okay. Well, we are so glad to see you all this afternoon. So thanks for joining us for the Dell Teaching and Learning Academy celebration. We have often marveled throughout this fall how much we admire your willingness not just to engage in and prioritize ensuring equity, but to engage in that work in the face of truly unprecedented circumstances. Today is an opportunity for us to celebrate the work in progress that's been made across the district to ensure equity. And you'll hear from Dr. Andy Forlis, as well as from colleagues, about what we've learned since we began our partnership as an academy. We'll process some of those learnings and what they mean in terms of supports and systems going forward, and leave with additional line of sight on what next level work and engagement might look like. So we'd love for you all to kick us off. We're going to put in the chat a link to a Padlet, and would love for you to share in that Padlet an image, a quote, or a description that indicates a celebration of some kind relative to the work that you've engaged in the last 3 months. Go ahead and put that in now. And we'll give everybody a few minutes to do. Folks just coming in, welcome. Sorry if there was any confusion about the Zoom link. We are just sharing celebrations. So if there's a link in the chat to a Padlet, if you would be willing to add an image, a quote, or a description that reflects some kind of a celebration relative to the work that you've done for the last 3 months as part of the Dell Teaching and Learning.
And I imagine most of you have done Padlet before, but if not, all I have to do is double click anywhere on the screen, or you can use the big pink plus sign at the bottom, and you'll get a little pad and check out all the many things you can add: images, links, documents, all kinds of stuff.
So I'm curious, in the last session, we asked everyone to bring stories that told the story of ensuring equity in the Mesa Public Schools. And I'm curious what story this Padlet tells you. I think one of the stories that speaks to me is that story of connection. There's a lot about collaboration, a lot about making connections. The time to reflect and connect is definitely a story being told here. Any others?
Julie, this is Andy. I don't know. Can you hear me? I think I'm good.
We can hear you.
You can? Okay, good. Well, as an outsider looking in, I see the importance of many perspectives and people to do the work of educating kids.
Mm. Absolutely.
Julie, I have one speaking to me right now. The image of adversity introduces a man to himself.
Mm.
This has caused a lot of inward thinking and causing those around me to look inward and really to discover who we are as humans, and then also as a school community. So that image, whoever put that up, is really speaking to me. Thank you.
Mm.
I'll piggyback, Julie, a little bit about what you said about reflection. I shared this a little bit with John too, but I see it over the board, so I'll touch on that as well. But just the power of reflection and the opportunity to have some one-on-one reflection, I think was really beneficial, and I think I see that resonating in here. But then just opportunities to reflect with our colleagues and to set aside time to really process practice and ideas and goals. That just allows you to really think about what's working or what new thinking you have, and to try it on with someone else. And I found that to be really helpful, and it allowed me to even kind of pivot a little bit in where I was in my thinking and what really needed to happen next. So I think that reflection and that reflective practice, particularly with someone outside of my work, has been really, really helpful.
Fantastic. I'm struck by your the phrasing of try it on, Amy, because even doctors have experimental medicines, right, that they practice, and so this concept of trying something out and being able to iterate on that and having collaborative partners to do that with is a space that, unless we make that space in education, we don't have. Any other stories just coming out of this or resonating out of this Padlet? Okay. Well, I'd love to, before we hear from Dr. Forless, I'd love to turn it over to Tom Osmond, who is the Dell strategist that has been, you all probably know very well at this point. But Tom, do you mind just giving us a little bit of information about the Teaching Learning Academy celebration and what that's all about?
Hey everyone, I know some of you I spoke to only on the phone and never seen, so it's great to see some of you in person. Well, I guess this is in person in 2020. So this is exciting. It's been a nice, I have gotten to vicariously live through this journey that you all are on through the facilitators that you've had, and then, hearing from Andy, Jennifer, and some other friends regarding this process. So it's super exciting. It's something that we love doing. It kind of takes it into the real work that is what education is. My job, just in case you didn't know who I am, I live in Nashville, but I support and serve the learning transformations throughout 11 different states in the country, working for Dell. I spent 15 years in a school district a little north of Tampa, doing various jobs. Actually all of your roles, except I never had assistant soup in my title, so those are cool titles. I didn't ever had that. But other than that, yes, I want to share my screen real quick. Something that you are all going to be receiving, and you will get this to your individual home addresses. No, I'm going to send it to the central office, and hopefully you have some inner office courier system that you can get this out to each other in. But you all are going to be receiving I think it's really cool. It's going to be on super nice paper. Remember paper, things that we used to actually get. It's going to be on paper, and it's going to be a nice certificate. It'll be who you are, your facilitator, celebrating that. If you all are into digital badges, I don't know if you are, I don't know if you build digital portfolios, if you put things at the bottom of your email addresses, you're gonna have one of these to add to that collection. We hope that's pretty cool. It's pretty exciting. Something that we're kind of excited about in my team's work is that not many folks realize that Dell Technologies is so invested in education. They know Dell Technologies sells and creates a lot of awesome solutions. And Michael's words are to change human progress and to evolve, how humans interact and live and breathe. But we do awesome things in education. So the fact that you all are able to go through this academy and then be the trailblazers to lead all this work with those you serve, super exciting. So I just wanted to say that. Can't wait to work with you more. Can't wait to get back to Arizona in person. Oh, when, please, I need something. And I will see you all next time.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. So when John and Lori and I were thinking about this, how to best celebrate, one of the things that we talked about was how to to do that in a way that is both grounding and celebrates the work that's happened already, but then also sort of sets the course for work to happen going forward, and to have it be a comma rather than a period at the end of this celebration. And so we've invited Andy Forless to just talk to us and to say a few words. So Andy, thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thank you, Julie. And I promise to be brief, because I know you guys have a big agenda to get through, and time is always super precious. So I just want to first appreciate all of you for your leadership and for your time. When we think, I'm always thinking about 2020 and what is our story? What is our bumper sticker of 2020 going to look like and sound like? So I know that we're going to remember adversity, and I know that we're going to remember reinventing the way that we do our work. But one of the things that I'm hopeful for is that you remember this great opportunity to participate in a pilot that stretches this courageous leadership that you have to say, how are we going to get better at the work that we do with a focus on equity in probably the most unusual time in American history and education? So, as trailblazers, as history makers, I'm just so inspired by your perseverance to stick with this pilot and to think about your profession, and to think about your leadership, and to think about how that all impacts the life of our children so differently, and then ultimately just creates better communities for us. So as we think about this pandemic and feel like we hit our heads against a wall more times than not, this is a time to celebrate forward movement as a team. And I'm hopeful that many of you have gotten to know each other differently and better within a very large school system. That these are the friendships and those collegial relationships that carry us through some of our tougher times that we confront. So thank you for being thought partners together. Thank you for caring so much about Mesa Public School kids. And thank you for your investment in your own profession, and how together we're going to continue to get better for creating more equitable outcomes and opportunities for our children. So thank you, thank you, thank you. You have much to celebrate today. I'm going to hang in for as long as I can. I'm going to hand it back over to Julie. And if there's anything that I can do to support after this that you think about and say, we really need to be thinking about expanding this type of learning throughout our district. We need to think about how we shape the work that we do differently. I'm always, always happy to hear that. So Julie, on with you. You're so lucky to have gotten to know all of these amazing, amazing thinkers and leaders in our district.
We absolutely feel that way, for sure. Thanks so much, Andy. Appreciate it. I'm actually going to kick it over to John, because we are going to be able to have an opportunity to hear from a few folks in our panel discussions and kind of hear what some of the projects that you all have been working on and what you're learning from each of those things. So I'm going to kick it over to John to lead us through that.
Thanks. Thanks, Julie. And I just wanted to echo something that was probably said in the early part of this whole adventure that we may or may not remember is when we have conversations, we are an outside group that comes in and consults and works with the leadership in Mesa. And we have those conversations when we're talking about equity. Dr. Forlis and Helen and others said, it's really, really important that we allow our people in Mesa to have a voice, and for our people in Mesa to collect evidence of what's going on in our practice, so that anything that we create related to equity, related to profile of graduate, related to anything, has that Mesa evidence and Mesa voice. So that was the main impetus for this. So thank you so much for going through this activity. I think it was fun. It was fun conversations for me. Boy, I had a good time just talking to all the people I got to talk with, and to see kind of the trajectory of how things played out over time. And I appreciate people who, especially those that talk to me, when I would ask them, questions about a different perspective, and then they would come back and say, I really thought about this. And like Amy said, being really reflective. When we think about what we want to do with kids, we want to get them to be that reflective person, and you don't always get to do that. So I appreciate that opportunity to do that with some of you. We've asked just a couple people to share, because we don't have time for everybody to share. But at these celebrations, we often do have panels, and we're going to ask a few people under those three big buckets of equity that are in the equity KPIs and other documents that are in Mesa that describe equity. And so we just asked a smattering of people from each group to share under each bucket. When I was a classroom teacher, I learned that when you show a video or you have a guest speaker, you have to give your kids questions so that they can gather evidence while the panel's going on. So you have some questions for you. So as they're going through, they're just going to share some of their reflections, like you've been asked to do in your critical reflection. They're just going to share some of their thoughts. And as you're going through, think about what did we as a group learn, and maybe how does that connect to what you've learned, because you represent such diverse offices and positions, and you work with different people and different kinds of things. And it's really kind of interesting to look for the trends across those. So what did you hear people talking about learning, and then how did that relate to what you've learned? And then the whole day will really focus on what are the implications of what we learned for as we move forward. Because as I've told my group, there was no way by December 4th we were going to accomplish moving the world, especially since you were moving the world every day to get kids into the classrooms or to get them online or whatever. So we need to think about what to do moving forward. And so we will go into breakouts after that to think about what did we learn from these panels and from our own experiences, and how does that influence the documents we have. So that was probably far too long. I'm just going to turn over at the bottom of the page of the agenda. You see we have our three groups. I'm just going to ask them in turn to go. They're going to share, what they focused on, what they learned about that, and some of their implications. We'll have about 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes per group. And hopefully if you're in a panel, you want to build on what somebody said, that's fine. And hopefully we'll also have time for you to share, because you all went through the experience as well. So I'm going to just kick off the instructional practices panel. We've got 4 people: Evelyn Fox, Eric Von Berg, Christina Weber, and Aaron Kazmarek. So I'm going to just start off with Evelyn. I see your name first, so lucky you, you get to go first.
I certainly didn't know I was going first, but hey, I'm up for it. So my goal, which kind of has been ongoing, is to promote performance-based and project-based assessments to the district math teachers. And how that ties to the equity KPIs of instructional practice is hopefully by implementing more performance-based assessments, students will be better critical thinkers and problem solvers. They'll believe that math connects to their interests and cultures. They'll believe that teachers support them in their learning, and that their grade reflects their learning and not just their ability to, mold to whatever the teacher exactly wants on that test or something. So it's kind of easier to explain what I did through the evidence lens. So I created this year some performance task and project banks because teachers last year were saying they don't have time to find good performance tasks that align to the standards. So I created those for them and asked them to, invited them to share as well. I've been spotlighting teachers who are implementing these practices. And then Julie had the idea to get the student perspective, because I've been spotlighting the teachers, and maybe if some people have never tried it, maybe when they see those spotlights, it doesn't make them want to try it. It just makes them feel bad that they're not doing it, or I don't know. I don't know exactly what those people's reactions are. So she said, maybe you should get some student input on what they think of these activities. And so I used Thanksgiving as a reason to give teachers a little 2-question survey. And the survey that they gave to students said, are you thankful for your teacher and why? But the second question said, was there a math lesson from this semester that stood out as memorable or engaging to you, and why? And the responses I got from students were, I couldn't have predicted. They really speak, first of all, of course, students didn't say, I really love taking notes and taking tests. The students picked out the exact type of things that I've been trying to promote, these performance-based assessments, and they really spoke to these equity instruction practices. So I just pulled out a few quotes I was going to share with you. So some of the quotes about students becoming better critical thinkers and problem solvers. One student said, I liked the space project because you could use the information in the real life world. Sorry, these are their words. Doesn't always flow. And another one said, it was a Jamboard test that was so hard that it was so engaging. So it's like they craved that difficulty level, actually, and the fact that it was on Jamboard, I think, helped. Some of the quotes from teachers that have been able to connect math to, or projects that connect math to their interests and their cultures, open-ended projects. One I put in the board already, it said, I love the recipe project because we got to express our culture. I love the parent function assignment because I got to be creative. And it was better than doing a bunch of problems. One student said, I really enjoyed the Among Us activity as well as a math escape room. So things that they're into right now, but it was all math related. Another one, I really like the zombie apocalypse and the poster. So these are just all sorts of things that our teachers are already doing. And I put all this stuff in these quotes in the math newsletter and tried to celebrate teachers that way, that students are also recognizing, these practices and appreciative of it. And I had a bunch more quotes, but I'll be done.
That's okay. Well, I think that's really interesting that Eric comes next, because Eric and I have talked a lot about rigor and increasing rigor, and sounds like you're doing that through an engaging way. So, and that kind of dovetails nicely into Eric, what you've been working on.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think the interesting thing is I'm going to have a little bit harder time explaining that. Well, I had a goal that I thought was my goal at the beginning, and I don't know if many of you experienced that it almost became my goal by the end of this is to have my goal nailed down. And so it did transform over time. I worked with Jen in the beginning, and we were really focusing on that we think one of the primary routes towards ensuring equity is high quality instruction. And if we can do that and have high quality instruction in the classrooms, we're going to move the needle. And one of the things that we have been talking about, and these are conversations that extend before this this particular project, was to looking at instructional design and how is it that we need to build capacity for building coherent units of instruction. So we started down that. John and I started talking about it, and I got quickly, it helped me understand that I really need to think about the scope and scale of the project, because that is a big problem that's been facing us for a long time. So we've been working on that as we went along. Not only doing this, not only the pandemic, but also being onboarded into a position that I'm trying to kind of figure my way into. Plus, I know we're working with how is it that we provide the support through our different roles in teaching and learning. John and I started having conversations a lot about the data that we have that helps us understand where we sit on that ensure equity rubric explicitly in that instructional practices. So in an effort to build some of those systems and teams, and in fact, Evelyn's been part of the conversations, Christina's been part of the conversations, Sean's been part of these conversations, where we have brought the teaching and learning specialists from across all of the areas together. And where we have been engaging in a lot of conversations about what does the data that we have available to us tell us, and explicitly about the rigor of instruction, what's happening in the classroom. And at this point, we have taken a data dive into two instances into various kind of summative high-level sets of data, including high school rates of failure. We looked at students who've been exited from the ELL program or ELL services and how they're faring. We also looked at what was that other one? Oh, we looked at the benchmarks and how the students were doing so far this year. And as we were investigating the data, the questions that we were looking at were not only what does the data tell us, but what does the data also not tell us? And what are the questions that we have that maybe the data, because I mean, we're of the mindset, of course, that a good set of data probably solicits way more questions than it actually answers. And in an effort to try and figure out what type of data do we not have available to us that we need to be able to think about the instructional practices, to think about instructional design, to also foster those conversations that we need to have, including building that kind of the coalition of the willing who wants to undertake this work. So that's where we sit right now. And in fact, we had our second conversation yesterday, and it's really inspiring us to look at and have conversations with more people to figure out what our next steps are and how to build those systems to have all of that stuff ready to go so we can be in the best position to support the instructional practices on the campuses.
Nice, thanks, Eric. One of the observations I had with a lot of people I worked with is we'd use that ensure equity progression. And if you look at the beginning, you're looking at data, and then you're looking at policies, and are you going to need to change policies? And I could see people going back and forth. It wasn't just always moving forward, because what Eric found was, they had looked at some data and they're trying to answer some questions, and it's like, oh, we need more data. So they went back and they're trying to get more data, and then they'll keep on going so that the policies and practices that they impact will be better informed. So I just thought that was an interesting trend I noticed from the people I was working with. So I'd like to quickly shift over to Christina. Christina's been reaching out to, whereas Evelyn was asking students, Christina's been reaching out to teachers through her liaisons. So Christina, if you want to share a little bit about your goal.
Absolutely. So connected a little bit to what Eric was talking about. We've been examining in TNL English learner data, and we know that I think all of us are aware that English learners often, when we look at the achievement gap, are one of the groups that we're concerned about. So when I thought about my goal for this project, I was thinking of that, but I was also thinking of the fact that this year in Arizona, we have a lot of new implementations. We have new models that are coming into play and also new standards. And because of the new models that are coming into play in Arizona, we have many more teachers that are being affected by English learners, meaning that we have many more teachers that have English learners in their classroom. So with all of that in mind, a goal that I wanted to work on was having teachers, a lot of teachers that have never had English learners before, look at English learners from an asset-based approach rather than a deficit-based approach. We often, when we look at our special populations of students, whether they be EL or possibly special education, we look at what they can't do, not what they can do. And I think we shortchange them a lot of the times because of that perspective that we have. So that was kind of the basis of my goal. So the second thing that we've done this year, along with the new models to get the word out about the new models, new standards, and also to impact teachers more, is we've recruited from principals across the elementary schools, elementary liaisons. So there's one representative from, I would say, the majority of our elementary campuses. We meet with them once a month in a PLC. We give them information in the PLC to bring back to the campuses. And one of the things that we just started on November 18th, so just a couple of weeks ago, was not only bringing compliance model related items back to their campuses, but also strategies that teachers can use with English learners. So I thought a good way to approach asset-based instruction would be through strategies that teachers could practically use with students on their campus. So we started that last Wednesday, and before I came up with a strategy for the liaisons to use with the teachers back, or to present to the teachers back at their campus that they could use with their English learners, is we gave the liaisons a survey to pull their teachers informally back at their campus as far as what their instructional needs were in relation to English learners. And then we could base the strategy we chose to present based off of that survey. So the majority of the responses, or a good number of the responses, focused on monolingual students, students that can't speak English, and also listening and speaking. So the strategy that we presented to the liaisons to go back and disseminate to the teachers was on accountable talk and language frames. And we came up with a very user-friendly framework for the strategy so that we could present it to the liaisons and they could very easily take it back to the teachers, where there was a video explaining the strategy, and then there were videos of the strategy actually being implemented with students, and then some resources that went along with it. And then also a connection to Arizona's language development approach, which is what the SEI models are now based on in the state of Arizona, and equity and asset-based instruction. So that was the project that I was working on. And we met with the liaisons again on December 2nd, so just this past Wednesday, and I gave them a follow-up survey just to, after they presented, some of them haven't gotten to the point of presenting yet to their campuses, but after they present it to their teachers, and after their teachers start implementing the strategy with their English learners, we want to know how did the little mini professional learning presentation work for you? How was the content? What could we do better? So we're asking for feedback so that we can improve what we present to the teachers. So one of the goals that we have as a department is I've created a Google document with this framework on it, and we're going to add more strategies to this that the liaisons can go back and present to the teachers on their campus so that they can get some very easy to use strategies with English learners. And then again, we're going to continue to try to connect asset-based instruction and equity with the strategies that we present. And another thing that we did as well, in addition to that, is through one of our webinar courses that we've offered, it just ended a couple of weeks ago, we also tried to incorporate equity and asset-based instruction in that as well. So I think as a department, in discussions with my colleagues in my department, we really have grasped onto the whole concept of equity. I think we've been there a lot with ELAD anyways, because of the group of students that we serve. But I think we're really of a mindset where we really want to start honing in on that in any professional learning that we do, so that teachers can really also start looking at the assets that their students have rather than the deficits, and really help their students rise to the academic challenges that they're fully capable of, that we often don't address. So I think that's it. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So thank you for listening to me.
Well, before I comment on that, I just want to know, do I see Aaron in the room?
No, John.
So that means we have more time to talk. So if he shows up later, we can put him at the end. But but Christine, one thing I noticed about yours, and actually about all the presentations we heard so far, is going back to the source, like going to the teachers and getting the information about what do they need, going to students and asking them about the PBL and the math projects they were working. And I know several of you other did that as well, that thinking about equity is actually going and trying to get information from all the people so that they have a voice in what you're doing. So I just thought that was a very interesting thing. I would like
John,
to,
oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I want to throw it out to everybody, any connections that they heard, and I'll let Lori speak first.
Yeah, and I just wanted to speak for actually for Aaron a little bit. I won't speak for him completely. And this actually came up with someone else in our group who was working on instructional practices. It connected somehow to one of the last things Christina said, and it was crystal clear in my mind. And now I can't remember how it connects, but maybe you'll see it. But a real focus on language, academic language, goal setting language for students, in this sense of in both cases, that was the approach used sort of school-wide, was to help students become very comfortable, students at all levels become very comfortable. Oh, and there's Aaron, to become very comfortable with their own language around goal setting. And Aaron's was around rubrics for writing in particular. So Aaron, you just jumped in and we were on instructional practices. I don't know if you want to jump right in or if you want to sit back for a few minutes. We had some, just a few questions for folks.
So Aaron, if you'd like to share a little bit about your goal, you are here right in time to do that. Otherwise, Lori was trying to share some of it for us.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I had a couple of issues happening with my PTO and whatnot. So
Well, that never
thank
happened.
you. I'm glad to be here. So yeah, no, I'm just, Lori and I were talking about our academic goals and just how we do that within our equity. And we were talking about the ways that we were going to approach it. And really we're going to approach it through just differentiation, higher level questioning, and really something that we've learned from Doug Fisher in incorporating the personalized learning network of taking it, doing that writing continuum and having our students be able to verbally identify where they're at and how they move along that continuum, and giving that advocacy, knowing that when we disaggregate data that certain ethnicities perform lower, by addressing the academic needs, that we really will be ensuring that equity through our higher level questioning and engagement. That was just really what Lori and I had spoke about, instead of taking a very direct, just talking about some of those key concepts, although we are doing that through our pay for performance goal. Our direct direction was really, in this time when COVID is on the tip of our tongues, of really focusing on the academic equity within our school and how we make sure that our students, regardless if you're in our resource program or you're in my gifted and talented program, that we're teaching our students how to articulate and verbalize where they're at, own where they're at, and then holding themselves accountable for the growth mindset of moving forward. So that was what our conversation. Does that sound about right, Lori?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
I can talk more if you want.
No, that's great. I think, John, you're on mute. I don't know if you were starting up the next group.
Yeah, talking to my computer screen.
Thanks so much, Aaron.
I was just going to say, hopefully you're starting to identify some trends that are similar to your learning and some of the learning that we've heard across the groups. In honor of the time, I'm going to move on to the next group. So even though you may be working on instructional practices, I'm hoping we'll see we'll learn some things from the other groups as well that might pull into the work that we're going to do later. So under culture of equity and professional learning, we have Christy Cuddy, Randy, I'm going to try Mallerwine. Hopefully I got close. Arlinda Mann and Teresa Vaca. So let's start with Christy.
All right, how's everybody doing? Good? It's Friday. So just like Eric said, the goal keeps moving, everything just keeps moving. So I originally wrote my goal around our pay for performance goals because I thought, let's get everything aligned and make this easy. And as I started working, that shifted, which has shifted my pay for performance. Monica, you don't know that, but it's coming. Anyways, we're an art school. Most people know that about us. And everything we do, we try to do through the arts. And how can I make this work through the arts? So the goal was to have equitable conversations and bring that to the forefront of our conversations through art. So my first thing I did was formed a committee. Our favorite thing as principals to do, right? I asked for volunteers because I really felt like shared leadership is the way we do things around here. And what I said to the staff was, this is something we are going to work on. And it's important. So if you have a passion for equity and you have a passion for arts, come see me. I had 10 people come within minutes after the meeting. So we met as a committee first off and just said, where are we going with this? What's the goal? And it was ever changing. It was a long conversation, and we decided to go down the road of what we do here on our campus best, and it's using a framework that if it's okay, can I share just real quick and just show something? So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully it will come up. Hang on just a moment. See, this is my skills are coming out right now. Okay. This is called the Lincoln Center Capacities for Learning. Can you see that okay? John, can you see? Because I can see you. Okay. So this is what we do. Everything we do is through these Lincoln Center capacities, and it's much like the depth of knowledge or Bloom's taxonomy, and it's very circular. So everything we start with, we notice deeply. We decided as a committee that we're going to dig into data and notice it deeply, and that's the first steps. The next thing we do as a school is we embody, and that's physical movement. We thought, well, we're not going to embody any kind of data, but we skipped that step. The next thing was posing questions. So the data naturally caused us to start posing a lot of questions. And then the next step is to identify those patterns. And you can see it goes on to make connections, empathize, start thinking about other perspectives on things. And then we had to settle with, we're going to live with some ambiguity on some of it. Some of it we're not going to understand. Try to create some meaning and then take action on it, and then reflect and assess. And it keeps going in a circular motion like that. So I wanted to share that with you because this is how we do everything at this school. It's how we teach. This is how we run our meetings. This is what we do with art. So this committee got together and we asked for data because data is something that's easy to talk around, and it can't get too emotional, and it's not about what I'm doing wrong. It's just what it is. So the committee decided as a group, we wanted to look at attendance based on equity and on our ethnicities. And that was data that was not easy to get. I have to tell you, I had to do some digging and some phone calls to the district, and we got it. And the data around attendance is kind of shocking. The committee and myself, we really had a moment of, oh my gosh, what's going on here? We're finding our Hispanic and African-American communities, their attendance is much lower. And right now in the remote setting, mind-blowing, really bad. Why? Pose those questions, right? So we started having some really deep conversations around that. And naturally, we want to solve all those problems. And Julie has helped me through this so well that we're not here to solve the problems. We're here to cause the conversation. And I really valued that time with Julie. If there's anything I got out of this whole process, is slowing down, stopping, turning everything off, and thinking as a leader with another leader or someone else that can relate to this. And I think if our district can take anything away from this, it's to give us that time to do it, to turn it all off and really focus on something, because this really opened my eyes to some things going on with our campus. So attendance was the first thing we started digging into. We're just now getting into discipline, and there are a lot of feelings coming out with the discipline, just with this small committee. And those feelings are something that we're grappling with. It's very internal, and that's about culture. And that's why this is so important that we tackle the culture, I think, around this, along with, of course, you know, the data. So I'm going to share something else with you. The committee also decided when we start to have these conversations with the staff, we want to do it through art, because that is something that is non-confrontational. It is not blaming. It is not something that's going to cause defensiveness. It'll cause conversation. So we want to do these conversations through art. And this is going to be a totally different aspect to do things, but it is working and it's causing a lot of great conversations. The 30th, I capitalized on it, and thanks to Tracy and helping me make this happen, we brought in someone from Focus 5, which works with the Kennedy Center on arts integration. And when I got her on board, I said, we have to do this through the lens of equity. We're going to discuss how to integrate arts in the classroom, but we're going to work equity into it. So I'm going to share one more screen with you if I can, one more time, because this caused a lot of conversation on my staff. And this is the beauty of arts. I'm going to share it with you. So this is some of the slides that we went through on the 30th. We spent 3 hours on this as a staff, learning different steps to deeply noticing art and art forms, but you can use these steps in anything you teach. And so we learned the steps of looking at the gesture of the person and their focal point and the background and the size and all the things that are art driven. And through those conversations, we couldn't help but notice. Let's see if I can get the next one to come up. This little girl grasping this flag. My heavens, what a conversation that came out of that, and the background and the foreground and the placement of her hands and her eyes and the focal point. The next picture we compared, Jackie Robinson, where's his focal point compared to her focal point, and why was it painted that way? And what's the author or the artist trying to tell? So these conversations were really deep conversations about different ethnicities and the artists. And then it brought out, of course, conversations around school. So this is a really different take on things. I know that a lot of you are like, what in the world, where is this going? And I don't know. I don't know where it's going, but it's causing a lot of great conversations. And that's the beauty of this journey that I'm on with my staff. That we are going to tackle these conversations in a safe environment. And I have a guiding coalition right now that had that passion to start this. So the data's helped us, the arts helped us, and who would have known you could put the two together to have a conversation.
Thanks, Christy. That was really interesting. As a former music educator, I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I learned was, like, you had 10 people volunteer right away. What does that say about the culture of Mesa and your schools? So fantastic. Randy, I'm really curious to hear a little bit about your goal and what you learned from this experience. And you're gonna have to,
my cursor occasionally gets caught on my laptop and I can't get it to the other screen. So my goal, it was kind of interesting because I wasn't really sure when we started this process, but it kind of worked out for me because I had already kind of committed to some work with our district leadership team that fit really nicely in with Ignitive Culture of Learning, and also overlaps into Ensure Equity. And what I've been doing is we have a leadership team that's district level, pretty much directors all the way up to Dr. Forless, and we meet together once a month. And I was fortunate enough to be asked to do some training on school culture that would evolve into strong, positive organizational health. And one of the key components to that was the development of psychological safety. And why this really fits into the equity goal is because we know that equity can be driven in the classroom with choice and voice, and student choice and voice. what the training that I've been doing and working with, slowly kind of gradually releasing information and having conversations with it. It's about our directors and our assistant soups and all our leaders working to create that psychologically safe environment, so all the employee members of their teams feel that they have a voice within their department, and that which brings value to their work every day. And the experience for me was pretty good. What I found to be valuable with it, a couple people touched on it on the Padlet and other ways today, but my conversation with Lori was nice because I was able to talk to somebody outside the organization with what I believe to be valuable with this, and just kind of talk it through. And as I talked it through, it started to unfold a little better, and it brought clarity to me and why I thought that why the goal kind of fits into our strategic plan, and ultimately what I hope it will kind of come out the other side with is that we have a really collective understanding that we need to develop culture and discipline behaviors and funnel those all through everything in our strategic plan to come out the other side to connect to our promise, and that will ensure successful, sustainable organizational health. But without everybody having a voice and there being those large elements of psychological safety, there wouldn't be equity. And I don't know if we would be able to come out the other side as that successful, sustainable organization. When I look like, so my goal is still in transition. Like, I'm still working on it. I won't know if we are getting close to meeting or not until we spend a lot more time on it. And how I will measure if the goal is met is really through a lot of qualitative signals that can be observable when working with leaders, and watching behaviors and listening to tone and watching body language and different things like that. And some of the stuff that we'll talk about as a group. What are signals that you can observe that your department or your team feels safe, and there's trust and there's vulnerability. And I have been able to kind of look at the work that we've done together as a group and see if we're making steps in the right direction through a Google Doc and exit tickets that that people have commented on after each set of training. I've been able to look and kind of read the words behind the words, because everybody says the same thing. Oh, it was a great day. Thank you for your time. But then what are the important words and the critical words that are embedded in there that show interest, show understanding, but also drive the future conversation within the team. So that's pretty much where I landed on it. I felt that the real value with working with Lori was the fact that she was kind enough to just listen and let me kind of babble on, and then ask provocative questions that helped me seek clarity through just sort of sorting things out in my head as I was walking through this, which sometimes, as a lot of you guys know, when you work by yourself in isolation, creating something that you feel like you have a good understanding of, sometimes it can get a little muddy. And Lori helped me kind of come to some clarity on that. And again, that also leads into the importance of the work where we do have, everybody has a voice, and we can have honest, thoughtful, respectful conversations on how we come out the other side in decision making and understanding in Mesa Public Schools. So
yeah, that's really interesting, because I had one of my cohort members is a principal and did not use the same words, but is working on the same types of things at the school level. So I really hope that we can get all of you to keep this work going so that you could stratify it across levels. So as you're working in the district, you continue working at a school. So thank you very much. And I'd like to introduce Arlinda, who made me think a lot and who introduced my favorite question, and that is, what is the why? And so everybody in my group, I kept asking them, what is the why? And I got that from Arlinda. So I'd like say thanks and share a little bit about what you learned on your journey.
Thanks, John. I have to say, it feels good to hear other people say that what they thought their goal was at the beginning is not their goal in the end. And because I fall in that category. So to give a little bit of background, a few years ago, as a district, we were on this journey of reducing out-of-school suspensions. And the governing board looked at our suspensions and said, they're too high, you need to do something about it. And so at the time we had an associate superintendent who took that under his wing, and that was his task, to reduce out-of-school suspensions. And I have to say that as a district, we did really well with it. We did reduce suspensions. But as we've taken our focus off of it, our suspensions have started to tick up. And so I thought, oh, this will be my goal. How can I help principals have more tools in their toolbox to be able to do things besides suspension? So that's what I thought was my goal was. But as I had my conversations with John, and as I had conversations with principals, I started to realize that was not the correct place to start. So we read the article in this group where the babies were being thrown into the river, and somebody decided to finally run upstream and see, why are the babies being thrown in the river? And that was my premise for the why. So we're suspending kids, whether it's out of school, in school, whether it's a detention or an after school thing. But why? Why are we doing this? Why are we getting to that point where we feel like a consequence has to be given to a student? And things like PBIS are used so that we have positive reinforcement, things like restorative practices, there's reset rooms. So as a district, we are rich in resources. We have lots and lots of things happening, but it goes back to the why. So what I found was discipline is not black and white, because we can't say student A fought, student B fought, it's a 5-day suspension. What I found was people see that differently. What one person calls a fight, another person doesn't call a fight. And I found things like posturing for a fight equals a fight, and therefore has a fight consequence. And then I'm like, but why? But why is that? And it really came down to student ethnicity, race, and gender. Huge in leading administrators to apply a consequence or a restorative practice or a think session. And I pulled up that data. I went back and started looking at, even during the time when we reduced suspensions, and John, this is data I looked at yesterday, so I don't think you and I had this conversation about it, but even when we reduced suspensions, our African-American students were still being suspended at a higher rate than their Latino and white counterparts. And we didn't ever, to my knowledge, right, I did not ever dig into that data to find out why. We looked as a district at the whole number of suspensions went down, and we all went, yay, pat ourselves on the back, we did good. But as we get into these equity conversations, it's huge. Equity in discipline practices is huge and plays a big part in why people do the things that they do. So in my conversations with principals and having digging into what does discipline look like on your campus, tell me about this reset room that you have. I found that through anecdotal conversations with principals, we could have a situation where student A is speaking up for themselves and student B is speaking up for themselves. Student A happens to be African American, so that student is being defiant and disrespectful. Student B happens to be white, and that student is being an advocate for themselves. Student A gets a consequence for being defiant and disrespectful. Student B gets a pat on the back for being an advocate for themselves. And I went, wow, this is not black and white, because we do have a consequence for defiance and disrespectful, but we have to back that up quite a bit. What are we classifying defiant and disrespectful? So then that unveils a whole nother thing about people's biases. And one of our pay for performance goals is to take a look at equity through the lens of some terminology. And that lays a nice groundwork for, okay, as I'm having conversations with leaders at schools, what are some biases that people have? And this idea of an unconscious bias, right? We say to people all the time, I'm not racist. And the reality of the situation is we all have biases, me included. And to say we don't is the problem, because we have to acknowledge those, we have to uncover them so that then our actions can be different. If I know that I tend to be harder on African American students, I need to be aware of that. And I need to take that out of the equation, and I need to really look at what is happening in front of me. And through conversations with principals, it got really exciting, because I had one principal come back to me and say, wow, even in this remote environment that we're in, or this remote and not everybody on campus environment that we're in, she came back from lunch recess one day and looked, and there were 5 kids sitting in her front office, and all 5 kids were African American. And only 2% of her population is African American, and less than that is on campus at this time. And that was a real eye-opening experience for her. And if we hadn't had the conversation about biases, she said, I don't think I would have looked at it. I would have looked at it as, oh, you were throwing sand on the playground, you refused to wear your mask, you didn't bring your home, things like that. She said, but it really caused me to go back and have a conversation with students about, okay, tell me what happened, how did this happen, and really delve into the individual child and some background that every kid comes with. So where will this take us in the future? We do have a discipline committee moving forward, and many of you know Leilani Scott is leading that up, and I'm a part of it, and some people in this group are a part of it as well. And I fully anticipate that what we are thinking right now is going to be our goal, like to come up with a district matrix, is going to morph as well, because we're going to find that until we have the hard conversations about our biases and uncovering our biases and the why behind our discipline practices, we aren't going to be able to get something going for the whole district. So it'll be a process, and there's policy change that's going to be involved. And I mean, our dress code, and Helen, you and I have had this conversation. I mean, we've got a do-rag in our dress code. I mean, how biased is that? So, yep, that's what I'm working on.
Well, you can see how enjoyable I really enjoy the conversations with Arlinda, and why we couldn't start off with everybody has biases, so what are yours? We couldn't start there with this process, right? We had to start with the data we felt comfortable with. And I'm so glad that some of you got to that point where you're really digging into the equity issues now. And one of those is my friend Teresa, and I asked her to present because she found out something that is not even in the equity KPIs. So I'm just going to turn over to Teresa to share her experience.
So I first want to thank John, because like Eric and several and Christy have said, like really deciding on the goal was a really part of the journey and going back and forth. But being able to be coached and work with somebody like John was such a great experience. So I think that's been really beneficial for me, because I can count probably on 2 fingers, two times that I've had the opportunity to be coached. And so it has been great. So, John and I were working together, and when he says something that has been not omitted from our KPIs was really the conversation about parents and their role in equity. And so we really feel like that's a pretty glaring omission to not have our parents be part of this. And I'm in the midst of work of establishing what is called a Special Education Parent Advisory Council. And so we are in the beginning stages, and we're actually working with Raising Special Kids as the organization that's bringing us together and helping us identify our goals. And so I just want to tell a personal story and the work that lays ahead for us and how it is so personal. I think when we think, I come from a very different culture. And so John and I have also talked about being a relatively new administrator in this district and having tough conversations around equity. I came from New Mexico, which is a dual language state. And so there's a lot of effort and there's a lot of culture around languages and what that means to people and how it affects their work and their interactions and their relationships. And I think we can take language for just for granted. So a personal story of my grandmother, who was a non-native English speaker. And she tells me a story of when she first went to school and her experience in school and listening to all these children speak English and not speaking English, and how she felt about that, and running home after school, her first day of school, running home to her mom and just saying, oh, those kids, they're so smart, they speak English. And so just really understanding how she felt less because she didn't speak English. And then through my career as being an educator, a teacher, and a principal, oftentimes seeing my grandmother in the face of my parents or even my students who were non-native English speakers, spoke primarily just, spoke Spanish, and really watching their faces as they were unable to communicate in English, and watching them going through a series of emotions and feeling less or feeling compromised or feeling not valued because their voice wasn't heard because they were non-English speakers. So I just think that is just a core part of me as an administrator. And then my experience in New Mexico of being a dual language state, where we most meetings were always in both English and Spanish, and oftentimes a third language of being a Pueblo language, of being Tiwa or Keres, and really trying to be inclusive in our practices through language, understanding how important language was. And I remember when I first came here and one of my first meetings, standing for the Pledge of Allegiance, and the pledge finished and everybody sat down, and I looked around and I thought, oh, we're not going to say it in Spanish, and we're not going to say it in Navajo, and just really feeling, perhaps a lack of inclusiveness when we don't include other languages in our day-to-day interactions with our students and our families. So in our work of CPAC, again, we've just started, and in the last couple of meetings, we've begun to identify goals. And so our parents worked separately from us to identify their 3 priorities. And I found it really interesting that their priority was to ensure that our non-English speaking parents have access to both input into decision making, but also have full access to all resources and information that is out there about their students who have disabilities. So I think some of our families who have children with disabilities have a double barrier, some obviously with language, but sometimes, the barrier of really struggling to communicate about a child who has a disability and the bias that can be associated with that, and the uphill battle that many of our parents of students with disabilities experience. So we have focused on identifying as one of our goals to ensure equity of access to resources and materials, and really focusing on the language piece, our parents who are second language learners. So that is the work that lays ahead for us. We've identified the goal, and our next step is to identify those action steps and to break down into working groups so that we can really address these goals meaningfully. We have a very passionate group of parents who are very interested in this issue of equity that we're working on. And beyond, the parent involvement piece, but ensuring that our parents who are non-native English speakers have access to being a participant in decision making and being a participant in the input at the district level and certainly at the school site level.
Yeah, well, thank you, Teresa. I was so struck when she said her parents said that they don't feel empowered to make decisions or to influence decisions in the district just simply because they can't access through language. So really powerful statement. So thank you very much. Julie, I think we can finish the lap. We have 3 more. I think we can do it in about 15 minutes, if that's okay. All right. So, and you're all taking notes, right? Because you're going to get into a breakout group and you're going to talk about what you learned. But let's move on to our Equitable Systems group. And I'm just going to go right to Monica.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay, it's always a struggle. All right, so my goal was around the KPI of diversity of teaching, classified, and administrative staff. And so really wanted to focus on what that looks like related to work and leadership development, specifically to our continuum for leadership development. And so that's kind of splintered into a bunch of different things. When you think about what is our demographic right now? Who are our students representing right now? Which groups are those? And whether or not our teaching staff and our administrative staff actually is it reflected in those bodies of adults, or what does that look like, and what is actually our needs as far as student demographics? So I'm working with Robert Carlisle right now and Lisa Cannon as part of the Equity Task Force to dig into that data and see actually who are our students and what is represented in our district, and then move from there to create some action steps about what work does that need to be, where do we need to focus our efforts as far as diversifying our staff. And then second is how do we go about doing that if we haven't already done that? And if we do not match, our adults don't match what student demographics we are, then where do we go? And so I'm also working on creating partnerships with administrative organizations or teacher preparation organizations that might help us diversify, which then has led into recruitment and retention efforts, and thinking about what does that look like? What are our current practices and what might need to be thought about or altered related to that? And then I guess just that whole encompassing, what does that actually look like as far as leadership development in a complete system? So if we have adults that reflect our student demographic, then how do we go about developing those teacher leaders into a system that will then develop them into leadership positions that will then continue to be diversified in our district and more adequately reflect just what Teresa was talking about. Like if I'm a parent who somebody can't discuss with me a specific discipline issue with my student, it's different when you're an administrator and you can have that conversation and create an action plan with the parent because you speak a language or they can access you or your resources in a different way than bringing in a translator. So how do we get to that point, and how do we develop those systems and start with the retention and recruitment based on who we are, who our kids are right now? So that's kind of what it's splintered all over the place.
No, but it connects to so many of the people that I worked with. I'm looking at you, Amy Cram, doing it through literature, and I'm looking at you, Amy, who's going to talk. Amy Uche is going to talk later, and even Arlinda had some. It also reminds me that a lot of the Ed Trust work in school districts that do a really good job, they are very specific about recruiting certain kinds of people to represent their kids. So very interesting. I didn't get to work with you, but I really appreciated the focus.
Thank you.
Penny, do I see Penny? There you are, Penny. You want to share a little bit about your role? Yeah, sounds good.
Great. Well, so in my work as a principal coach, I started looking at how can I help to support and provide professional learning for our new leaders in our district. And so in starting to have conversations out in our coaching appointments built around the goals that our schools were setting for ensuring equity as part of our pay for performance, we started those conversations. And if we're going through large organizational changes to try to incorporate some of these things in there, what would be the support that they needed to create those systems and those structures to ensure that they are looking at it through the eyes of educational equity. So in starting our conversations was really interesting because what we found is, one, every school was setting different types of goals. But the bottom line was, how are we going through the change process? How are we creating the systems and the structures to be able to enact those goals and lead into a system of educational equity? And one of the interesting things, one of the eye-opening things for me was that in doing that work, it came back to some of that resilience. With all the changes that are happening now and all the things we're being faced with right now, cultivating and developing and coaching for resilience is one of the big foundational pieces that came up. So my goal kind of slid back into the culture piece a little bit. And how do you develop that resilience? Because we know we can't go through those organizational changes and those systematic changes if we don't have a resilient culture. So we started to do some more work on, building resiliency, and started talking about the change process and what that looks like, and how do you go through that change process in order to be able to effectively reach your goals. After those conversations, then mine kind of splintered off as well, like everybody else. And I started looking at the opportunities for our aspiring leaders in our district. So in looking at the leadership development programs that were in the process of, Monica talked about that continuum for leadership development. I have the honor of being able to work with our Leadership 1 and Leadership 2 development folks in those aspiring leaders. And so now then it became about how are we going to implement that into those groups as well. So how do we provide professional learning towards resiliency? How do we provide professional learning towards looking at through the equity lens and bringing it in? So if we can do it as we're onboarding our aspiring leaders, as they go through that continuum and they start to move up into building level leaders, district department leaders, those kinds of things, we're already starting with that mindset, that culture, and then working on those systems and structures. So in my goal, I obviously working in coaching with in the first and second year principals that I'm coaching, we're doing a lot of work on systems and structures in the change process. So now we've changed that to look at that through the eyes, through the lens of equity. And then with the aspiring principals, changing what we're doing with them to make that be a focus of some of the work that we're doing in our sessions when we meet together now, and kind of revising some of those leadership development sessions and focus. So mine kind of went all over the place as well. When you're looking at that, it slipped back into the culture piece, and it kind of branched out into a lot of different groups of people. So
yeah, that's fine. That's fine. And what's really interesting is I asked Amy, who's going to present next, to be in the Equitable Systems group. And I know, well, she's Director of Professional Learning. Why shouldn't she be in the Professional Learning group? But isn't that interesting how all three of these really talked about professional learning and professional growth? And so the three of you really kind of make a nice complement around different audiences that you serve in the district. So Amy, I'm going to let you wrap it up for Equitable Systems and share some of your goals.
All right, thank you. So much like everybody else, when I started my goal, I had something maybe not totally different in mind, but perhaps even like a different audience, but was really looking at professional learning and equity regarding designing to personalize for adult need, and also ensuring just different opportunities for staff to access learning. But what that ended up really bubbling into was looking at, or what we discovered through that process, was inequities to access professional learning versus on if you're a classified or a certified staff member. And so through that process and really looking at some data in what's offered, how it's accessed, and really meeting the needs of our classified staff, three areas kind of surfaced regarding exactly those things. So the differences in how we access professional learning versus classified and certified, even down to, do I have a device to get onto Canvas with and look at learning through, and am I using my cell phone, and is what is designed really compatible with that? And therefore, are we creating barriers to learning just based on who our audience is and the access that they have? And one thing that I was really wrestling with was this thought of, does everybody who wants to have an access to the table, to have a seat at this table to engage in this learning, are they able to do that? And the answer was no. And whether that was because it was outside of the workday and therefore they couldn't access it, or again, the technology wasn't there, or perhaps an unintentional oversight that audience should be a part of the conversation wasn't also coming through in those opportunities for professional learning. And so what we did was start to look at what's offered and what do we have available. And what COVID has really done is pushed our department, our professional learning department, really into a lane that perhaps is more diverse than it used to be. We really serve classified or certified staff, if you will, but with COVID, we started to provide a lot more opportunities for classified staff. That was a big ask in the spring for our classified staff who needed some other types of work to engage in if they couldn't fulfill those duties on site. What other learning and what other things could they be doing? So that was step number one in discovering, well, how do they get that if they can't even get into GROW? Or how do our substitute long-term teachers get that if they don't have, access to X, Y, and Z? And so we started troubleshooting some of those things, and again, just looking at what was available. And that really showed us some inequities in our systems and our structures. And so we started to then kind of inventory, well, what do we have and what do we need, and what do those audiences, what would they find valuable for their own learning? So how can we meet those needs as well? And in talking with just some district directors and principals, and looking at some of the systems and structures that are sometimes barriers to classified staff accessing learning, that generated some other conversations as well. And again, not intentional, it's just, again, those barriers that sometimes are just bound by a contractual day can be a challenge for some of our staff to engage in learning or the technology that's available. And particularly in this really virtual world, we're limited even to, come into the building and do it this way. Those options were kind of removed. So that gave us more insight. So we've gotten to the phase with this goal of really trying to develop a needs assessment and where our gaps and our discrepancies are and what's offered. And then through conversations with John, one of the meaningful next steps, because we've now entered into this space where we have more opportunities for particularly classified staff to engage in learning through our GROW, which is our LMS platform for those that are not inside Mesa. That's where we access our professional learning, is to systematize the survey that we use for professional learning in that regard. So for most of us who take, go to a learning meeting or take a course or take a class through professional learning, most of those exit tickets are designed by the presenter and the facilitator and, aren't necessarily procedural in how we collect feedback. And so that's kind of our next step. And that will help to inform, are we meeting the needs of our varied learners? Are we providing the appropriate access to learning? Do we need other things like Facebook Live and pop-ups and all of these different things to give more opportunities for more people to access the learning? And I just think it's really enhanced some of the conversations we've been having in our department. The connections we've made with HR have become much deeper than they were even 6 months ago. And how do we support different audiences, and how do our platforms allow those people to come in and take part? And so it's been some really interesting work and totally went in a completely different avenue than when I started.
Well, that's okay. I think that was probably the norm more than anything. And again, I think you really described this idea of when you're moving along that ensure equity progression, you get into column 2 and you're trying to look at data, and then you're going to go to, oh no, we have to go back to find some more stuff because we learned some more things. So as you were working with your staff on that ensure equity, just because you're in column 2 doesn't mean you're going to get to column 3. You might go back to column 1 again, but that's okay, because when you go back, it's a richer column 1 that you're thinking about. So don't worry about getting to the end and getting an A. It's having that growth in those conversations. So I will turn that over to Julie, who's going to help us figure out how we're going to relate what we have learned. You've learned so much in so many different areas, but all related to equity. Wasn't that interesting, hearing all the different things? I thought that was really cool. But sharing that with the documents that we're trying to help you bring back to your faculty and staff.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Thanks to everybody who was willing to share. We really appreciate it. It tells, again, going back to the story, I know I'm beating a dead horse, but what a rich story you all have been able to tell in terms of how many entry points there are to this goal around ensuring equity. So thank you so much for being willing to share those stories. We'd love to give you some time to process that. So you all have, for the last hour plus have been listening to all the different work. There are so many opportunities for connection, but also there's some real variety in terms of the approaches that you used to that ensure equity goal. So we'd love for you to do, I'm going to put you in some breakouts. We'd love for you to share your reflections, or, when John gave you those listening questions. So, what did you learn and how do you connect to what was shared? But then also, and so we'd like to give you a little time to do that and have that conversation. But then we'd also like you to think about, based on what you learned, what goes into these. There are these 2 resources that have been created. The Ensure Equity Field Guide, which has resources to support folks to have conversations around equity and deepen their work in buildings and in departments around ensuring equity. But then also that Ensure Equity, those look-fors and those progressions. So based upon what you've learned, what goes into those resources? What needs to be added or modified? So we'd really like to start to paint a picture of what the next level of our work within the district looks like. So we're going to give everybody about 20 minutes to have that conversation. Thanks, Helen. Thanks so much. Any questions, or really appreciate you being here. Thanks, Helen. Any questions or clarifying statements about going into breakouts?
Just make sure you do. I put the agenda back in the chat. It has links to those 2 documents, and you won't be able to access it once you go into your room. So make sure you open the agenda now if it's not.
And we can put it in when we're in the rooms as well.
That's true.
Right, here we go. So we'll come back about 10 of. Hey, Amos. How are you?
Oh, I'm late to the party.
No, it's all right. Everybody's in breakout rooms, so I'm going to send you.
Okay, cool.
You want to go to instructional practices, culture of professional learning and equity, or equitable systems?
Whoa, say that again. Sorry, my brain is mush.
You're good. Instructional practices, culture of equity and professional learning, or equitable systems.
Let's go equitable systems.
You got it. Coming up.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, you're accessorizing. Your glasses and your earbuds match.
I did not try for that. So Gaynell taught me this though. This is my COVID trick that she taught me. Is if you want to dress up your outfit, you put on a necklace. So
I know.
that's
Necklaces and scarves.
Put on a necklace.
That's awesome.
I sent me to the breakout room and not you. What the heck?
I was wondering what happened.
Why don't you show up as a, oh, here. Okay, now we're in business.
Oh, here we go. Now I can go. All right. When are you bringing everybody back?
10 of.
Okay. See you soon.
Okay.
Oh, here we are again.
Wait, is it all of us?
Yes. Hey, Lori, I was going to tell you that it was being recorded when Christy was talking.
Oh, good.
I'm pretty sure because it was saying recording on my, so I think it was.
Yeah, and I know we intended to. So something like that, you know, obviously we'd want to go back and get her permission, but I think that could be really cool to put something like that to show people how it sort of played out in real life. I think that'd be great. So.
Yeah.
Welcome back, everyone. Looks like we're waiting for one more group to come back here.
That's my group. Where are they? We were right in the middle of conversation. And I said, Mel, you have, and then it was gone. There they are.
There we come. All right, welcome back, everybody. Would love to do just a real quick highlight reel from each of the groups. Is there a takeaway or a nugget you can bring forward to the full group about that line of sight that we talked about on your next level of work?
I'll go first. I think we talked a lot about the value of role and describing different stakeholders, a variety of it, and how that role can influence how you use the field guide. And we might want to think about, are there levels of use of the field guide based on role? And then mapping it back to the ensure equity progressions. So like if you're in there and you need support, you go to the field guide to get support about that, but my role might be this, so I have this kind of support.
Our group talked about just organizing it linear, nonlinear, if that makes any sense. So there's the Kazmericism, you know, because it doesn't make it, you know, at one aspect we said it was too linear, it was too restrictive, but then we said it also had to allow for individual interpretation based on the leaders of the campus, ranging anywhere from the first year to 20 years. And their institutional knowledge, because what we noticed is every one of us had a different approach and angle to it. And then we framed it through the ensure equity goal. And within the ensure equity goal, Jen, we probably want to work on this, is just what are those subcategories with it? You know, we need to figure out the verbiage of what those subcategories are with each of those so we have common terminology. So what I'm saying is Lindsay was amazing at saying, we have to, what is the pre-learning? Well, the pre-learning is being aware of the portrait of the graduate with a specific focus on ensuring equity. Within the ensure equity goal, the pre-subcategories, whatever we need to call it, Jen, is that within those 4 subcategories, then identify that. That's the pre-learning. Within the pre-learning, then you have to find your KPIs or your data source to support your focus within your institution. And then that way, whether, you know, Tracy and I talked about my first year at Stevenson versus my 9th year at Stevenson, my first year, you know, regardless of Penny Briney having a conversation with an Amy Cram or anybody else, depending on their relationships, can now relate to it. And so that's why we said linear, non-linear, because you really have to be able to adapt it to meet all of their needs, depending on the varied needs of the community. Does that sound good, my team? That's what we said. So really you would do, what did we say? Pre-learning, data focus based on those subcategories, and then the document flowed smoothly, but we couldn't wrap our minds around until we went through that process.
Anybody else want to share any takeaways?
Can I share one thing that just came up right at the end that I've heard throughout this whole process? And that was, people are just not clear what equity means. And that very often people are just defining equity using the word equity, and that makes it very messy.
Yeah, that came up in our conversation as well. Okay. Well, we would love to close by doing 2 things. One, again, we are so grateful to you all for engaging in this work and being partners in this work. We are excited to see what continues, and again, appreciate you being willing to put a comma on the work instead of a period, and to keep going, keep learning. We would love for you to do 2 things before you leave. One is to share in the chat a point of most significance. So what is the most significant thing that you did, heard, or learned today? And if you would share that in the chat. And then the last thing is we're always looking to improve not only the cohort experience for you, but for future cohorts and our facilitation and coaching. So we'd love for you to take a few minutes and give us some feedback. And so I'll share in the chat a survey as well. But if you would go ahead and start just by sharing that point of most significance. Mm. 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 Okay, great. And I'm struck by the stories, just like we started in the Padlet, the stories of connection, the stories of shared goals, and really, really varied entry points. So thank you all so much for your willingness to dive into this work. I'm going to put the survey in the chat. Would love your feedback, but have a wonderful weekend and a great rest of the day.